Well, Michael, welcome to the podcast. How you doing today?
I'm doing great. How about you?
I can't complain. Looking forward to the wonderful time of the heat in northern and western Iowa. So can't wait till it gets to be about 90 degrees and a 50-mile-an-hour crosswind. Yeah, no, it's fun.
Yeah, that sounds exciting.
It does. Yeah,
Um,
you should come down and do that with us. Because I know how much you love the heat.
hey, you know what? Iowa is one state I haven't been to. I've been to
Well,
a
you,
lot of states.
you got to come. You got to come and get and have some of our loose meat sandwiches.
Ooh,
Those are to
now
die
see,
for.
now see, I'm gonna have to book an airplane flight for next weekend now because
There you go.
I am definitely a carnivore.
There you go. Our loose meat sandwiches are the best. We are known for having the fact that there are 3 million people and 30 million hogs too. So the hogs outnumber the people. So if you like pork, this is your state.
Hey, I am a Latin male and I know all about carnitas,
There
and
you go.
carnitas are all pork.
There you go. So Mike, I love to ask my guests a question, got to get to know you a little bit better. What's the best piece of advice you ever received?
You know, I grew up with, of course, both my parents, but my father was a truck driver and my mother worked in the school. So they were busy working. So my grandparents pretty much raised me, my brother, and my sister. And me, my brother, and sister were all 18 months apart. So we grew up really close. Um, but I would say the best advice was from my grandparents. They were really involved with the church and they were always helping people. And I would always see people come and go, picking up clothes, food, washers and dryers, refrigerators, just everything. And I remember asking my grandma, what's going on? And she said, we help people because that's what we have to do. You know, we have to help as many people as we can. And when I was little, I didn't understand it. But now that I'm older, I fully understand it because there's a lot of people that need help. And if we can offer whatever we can, it's good to give than to receive.
That's awesome. I love that. And it's so true because I just had a guest on my podcast as we were talking about unseen people. And she said one day she prayed a prayer that God would help her see unseen people. And I said those are always dangerous prayers because when you ask God to help you see unseen people, you start to see that. But you also need to pray alongside of that to make sure you have space in your life to, like you just talk about, how do you help people when you see people in need? So yeah, that's a beautiful lesson your family taught you.
Yeah, it really stuck. My grandparents had this um, nonprofit that they started in the city, well, in the small town at the time that I lived in, which is now a large city now, but um, it really just focused on helping all the people in need. So I'm very grateful for that. It's something I
Yeah,
want to try to carry forward.
that's awesome. In our life, there are always people, and you just kind of mentioned a little bit about your grandparents who served as role models to inspire us. Who are some people in your life that did that? And tell us what about them served to inspire you.
Well, my grandparents at first, when I was younger, of course. But as I got older, um, it was probably my parents a little bit, but then my father died when I was still in my early 20s.
Wow.
So so after that, my mother didn't make as much, so I had to go look for work to help. And I just said a prayer, God help me, and almost immediately I landed a great job. And it was at that company that I grew, I met a man named Paul Lawrence. And he kind of was like a second father to me because he taught me a lot of things about business, but more importantly, how to treat people and how to effectively get the most out of people if you manage them right, and I'll never forget he told me a good manager could make a mediocre employee look amazing, or a bad manager could make an amazing employee look bad.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah, it's very true. I like that.
So he kind of stuck, and him and I are very good friends now. And I always thank him every time I see him, every time I talk to him. I'm like, you came into my life where I was forced on working to help my mom, but I still needed a lot of growth because I didn't have a father figure anymore.
Right.
So he kind of filled that void. And I mean, he really took me under his wing. He didn't have to do that, but he did. And when I asked him, he's like, because I saw a lot of good in you, Mike, and I just wanted to cultivate that. So, I mean, I thank him. He's also a Christian as well, strong God believer. So that kind of helped too. So,
It does. You just wrote a book, Learn to Fly, Surviving COVID-19. So tell us the story behind that book.
okay. So, when my grandmother passed away, I was still in the Bay Area. So I moved to Southern California, stayed there for a few years, and then my mom got sick. So I relocated back to the Bay. And I was here for maybe a year and a half, and then COVID hit. Now, when COVID hit, I was living with a friend and I caught it from him, and I didn't even know that I had it. Um, Thank God for him calling 911, but apparently I passed out. They couldn't move me because I was just dead weight. So they called the paramedics. They came. Um, from what I was told, my heart stopped twice on the way to the hospital. And when they finally revived me, I went into the ER, and the doctors told my family, or my brother and my sister, um, that I was in the worst shape that they've ever seen anybody. Um, I had full blown COVID in both lungs. I was barely alive. My blood was completely poisoned to the point to where I had septic shock, and the odds of surviving septic shock are less than 1%.
Wow.
Um, you can get sepsis, but when it turns into septic shock, that's in-game material. So I had COVID, septic shock, and every single one of my major organs were shutting down. And they told my brother, "You're lucky if he can make it tonight." So
Wow.
I didn't know that that had gone on until later. But what happened for me was when I blanked out, I was no longer here anymore. I woke up and I was next to a lake, but the lake wasn't like any lake I'd ever been to or seen before. Um, the trees were moving, the grass was moving, the flowers and all the surroundings were moving. There were no clouds. The sky was crystal blue. The water was crystal blue. But everything was moving in such a way you'd figure that there would be wind, but there wasn't any wind at all. It was like I was in a place without any type of forces moving anything. Like on Earth, where you see trees move, you feel the
Sure.
breeze.
Right.
It wasn't like that. And I remember turning, and I remember seeing a small little cabin home. And I heard something say, "Come here." And I looked around, I was like, "Where am I first?" And then I
Right.
was like, "Who's calling my name?" So then I looked and I was like, "Oh, well, maybe it's in that cabin." So I started moving towards the cabin. And I say move because I wasn't walking, but I wasn't floating. It's kind of hard to explain, but I was just moving towards it. And when I got there, I saw this tall being, probably about 10 foot tall. And it wasn't like an NBA player where you have somebody with just elongated bodies and legs and arms.
Sure. Right.
Where they don't look proportionate.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I do.
Um, this person was extremely well built and perfectly proportioned. And their hair was like platinum. And I'll never forget their eyes. And I tell everyone this, the pupils or the irises of their eyes were like on fire, but it was like a kaleidoscope of color.
Hmm.
So it was like fire color. I can't explain it better than that.
Yeah, no, it's interesting.
Yeah, so they told me, don't be afraid. I have someone here that wants to meet you. And I felt completely at ease. I wasn't afraid. So they opened the door, and when I walked in, I was at my grandma's house, the way I remember it as a kid. And I saw my grandpa and my grandma. And my grandma did most of the talking, and she told me, you're fine, you're going to be fine, but you don't belong here. You still have things to do. And I said, okay. And she said, I want you to know that we love you and that even though you can't see us, we're always with you. And I said, thank you, Grandma. And, she told me a few things to tell my family that I had no way of knowing about. Um, and then she said, okay, it's time for you to go. And when she hugged me and I hugged her, it wasn't like a human hug where you can feel just the hug and the
Right.
warm embrace. It's like I felt her throughout my whole body. It was the weirdest feeling that I ever felt. And when I felt that, I just felt immense love. Just like the perfect, I just can't explain it. It's just intense. So when that happened, we said our goodbyes, and then this angel type being looked at me and said, "Okay, it's time." And they reached their hand out, and the minute I grabbed their hand, I felt like a vacuum had pulled me, and I woke up in the hospital with a tube down my throat.
Oh. So let me ask a question. Before this incident happened, can you describe kind of what was your faith like before this incident happened?
Oh wow, that's where my Walk in Shadows book comes in.
Okay.
um, I grew up Catholic. I am now Christian, born again. But when I was a Catholic, I believed in God because my grandparents were very devout Catholic. But
Sure.
as I got older, I kind of, I wasn't like a satanic worshiper or an occultist or anything like that. Nothing like that at all. But I was curious about the paranormal. So I dabbled with Ouija boards, tarot cards, um, psychics, stuff like that. I went ghost hunting with friends, um, and I didn't realize how naive I was for doing all that.
Sure.
Um, I actually saw like a live seance go on at a friend's house, and that was the same friend that had a Ouija board that we would play. And that thing does, I mean, I'll never ever touch one again, but that thing is evil. I don't care what people say, you know. But that kind of was my train of thought for a while. Um, and I didn't pray as much. I still believed in God and the devil, but I didn't pray as much, didn't go to church, um, just kind of live life taking it one day at a time. But it wasn't until I saw what I saw when I went through COVID, and then the journey, it took me almost 2.5 years to come back to being normal. That entire journey, it took that to really change me to where now I have no doubt in my mind that God is real. You need to put all your faith in Him. Um, you have to trust Him. And when bad things happen, it's not from God. It's just we live in a fallen earth, and the battle's already been won. We really have nothing to truly worry about if you have strong faith. So that's kind of like been my journey process. I went from non non truly fully committed to fully committed.
Someone that I read recently talked about the fact that the Ouija board and the seance is the way to describe it. It's a doorway into the occult, the dark side of spirituality. And a lot of people don't realize, like you just said, that the Ouija board, it looks like an innocent device, but it really is pure evil. And so a lot of times kids will, at their friend's house, they'll play around with it, not realizing what doors they're opening to their spiritual detriment. So you described something I think that's really important for those who kind of dismiss those things. It's like, oh, it's just a silly little game or something we do. That it really is something to be very, very cautious of because of what it can do to your spirit and to your soul.
hmm And that was kind of the big reason why I was very hesitant to talk about that past. I didn't want to reopen those doors again.
Sure.
Um, when I finished my Learning to Fly book, I was like, okay, that's it. But then the overwhelming responses I had from people who read my book that were like, well, you talk about stuff that you did in the past, but you don't really get into it. What did you do?
Right.
I was like, okay, well, let me ask God, what does God want me to do? And I prayed on it, and God's like, tell them so they can see the transformation. And I was like, you're right. So that's what I did. And that book will be out next week, I believe, by Friday.
Okay.
So, yeah, it really details all the things that I did, some of the places that I went, some of the things that I saw. I mean, yeah, people don't understand how evil these things are.
I've been watching recently just kind of some of the things that are being exposed about a lot of different industries that we have grew up with. There's a lot of stuff being exposed about what's happening in Hollywood. If you remember just a documentary with Nickelodeon, some of the dark side of the music industry, and a lot of the things you're describing, it seems like there are dark forces that are behind some of these industries and even some of the artists that we have put a lot of that we listen to and not really think about it. I've been paying attention a lot to the lyrics of a lot of songs, and there's a lot of really dark stuff in some of those lyrics. There was just one I heard last night where a artist was singing about um, we're both going to go to hell together, and I'm like, there as a Christian, there there's no part of me that wants to go. Well, if you got to go to hell, let me join you there. I was like, no, that's not the desire I place. I want to end up. But there's so much of that darkness in the arts and sometimes in music. As you talk about your book, A Walk Among Shadows, you describe the stuff you went through. So maybe kind of give us some insights into why do you think so much of that is prevalent in the things that especially young people, listen to and watch?
Well, I kind of joke around with my friends because we joke around about the music today, how it's way different
Right.
than what we used to listen to. Like growing up, we used to listen to Boys to Men, like a lot of the songs were about love and I love you, you love me, let's have a family.
Right.
But now it's like the music's gotten away from family and now it's more like devil, 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 Satan, Satan, Satan. And everyone thinks it's cool,
Right.
and I'm like, how the heck is that cool? Like, they don't understand, I mean, I've seen demons, and let me explain that just real quick. When I was in the hospital and I was on my road to recovery, they moved me out of the ICU into a waiting room, and I was told I was only going to be in there for less than 24 hours while they got my normal room ready for me so that I could start my rehab. Um, so I'm laying down in this room. Now, at this time, all I could move was barely my hands and my neck. My whole body was just atrophied. I couldn't move anything. So I'm laying in this bed and they, they roll me in the room and the doctor comes to see me and she says, okay, 24 hours, blah, blah, blah. Don't worry. We have a nurse assigned to you. You're good. So I said, okay. So I got a little rest and then the door opens and these two males walk in and I'm thinking, okay, they're here to maybe adjust my machines or something. But I remember looking at them and they had moles on their face. And I'm like, that's kind of weird. But okay, people have moles. Like, all right. And they started talking to me and they said, you're never going to get out of here. You're going to be in this room more than 24 hours. Don't listen to them. And I'm like, what are you talking about? You
That's
know,
not, that's not what you want to hear, is it?
right. And, you know, I don't want to like drag that on, but eventually when I left the hospital, they took me on a tour on every floor and every room to say goodbye to all the wonderful nurses that took care of me. And when I went past that room, I said, stop. I want to see the two guys that went in there. And the charge nurse, who's in charge of the whole floor, she told me, she said, guys, what are you talking about? She was like, the day that you were there were no men working up here. You only had one assigned nurse other than me. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she's like, yeah. She was like, your nurse went in there once to see how you were in the beginning, which she did. I remember that. And then she went in there to say goodbye and move you out. And I remember that. But in my mind, I'm like, well, what about the two guys that told me I wasn't leaving?
Right.
So right then and there, I knew what they were.
Wow.
So yeah. So evil exists, and if you go looking for it, you'll find it.
I also want to go back to something you said earlier, because when you talk about when you came out of that experience with COVID-19, the way you describe your faith to me was really interesting because I think you talk about something I think a lot of people who are being challenged in today's society about their faith are not really sure about. You just said something I thought was very powerful, that evil's in the world and bad things happen, and it's not God who initiates it. So often when we see tragedy happen in the world, the first response people had, if there's really a God, this wouldn't have happened. And I think what I always respond people with is, I think if you look at tragedies, oftentimes God raises up heroes in the midst of those tragic events and minimizes the impact that evil sometimes has in the world. And I think we have to look at some of those events differently. As you think about your journey now in faith, what lesson would you have someone who maybe kind of was like you beforehand, kind of lost, searching for God? What advice do you have for that person who's searching?
To ask questions, but don't be afraid of the answers that you get. You know, you we're talking about God here who exists on a level that we can't even comprehend as human beings, you know? So with God, he exists above time, he exists above us all. So you can't put a time frame on him because he sees the beginning and the end.
Right.
You know, you can't put our personal limitations on him. And that's where a lot of the disconnect comes from. You know, we try to rationalize, well, the world's horrible. You know, if there was a God, why are all these things happening? And you said it best. Well, God raises heroes in times of need, you know? And people need to also understand that the world is rejecting God, and you see it more prevalent now than ever. You know, even in the Bible, when Jesus walked in the desert for the 40 days, Satan tried to seduce him and get him, you know, and he told him, I can offer you every kingdom, everything on earth. The world is mine. I can give this all to you. Submit to me. And God told him no, you know? So when you take that and you think about it, this world, even though God created it, it isn't the creation that God intended for us. So you got all this negative energy, all this evil around the globe constantly. And what was promised to us is coming, you know. So when people die, I don't look at it like, yeah, it hurts personally because I'm a human, right?
Right.
But they're now in a better place if, you know, they've surrendered and believe. For the ones that haven't, I pray for them. I pray for everybody. You know, I was always taught to pray for those that even don't like you know, those that are against you. Pray for them more
Right.
because they're the ones that need it more. So, yeah, so my best advice would be ask questions. Don't be afraid about the answers that you get. But I also challenge the people answering those questions, continue to follow up with those people. You know, I've been to a lot of worship centers, outreaches, street preaching, and I see them actually bringing people, asking questions, but then they just leave them to the wolves.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, no, you got to nurture them. They're like little saplings. Don't let the thunderstorm just wash them away, because that's going to make them fall twice as, you know, back than what they are now. And they're going to lose even more faith. So, like I said, I challenge all the preachers out there to cultivate those people and, you know, check in with them from time to time. See if they need anything. Show them what a true person who walks with God really is about.
I think you just said something I think the church needs to really dive into, and that is when someone when God performs a miracle of faith in someone's life, what that person needs more than anything else is a church community to come around them and support them and nurture them. So, when the lost prodigal son or lost prodigal daughter comes home, the church becomes really important in their life. I know I've seen that especially in converts to like from Islam, where their other family abandons them because they've left the Muslim religion or Islamic religion, and all they have is their new Christian family. And so even for the person who may not have come out of that, but just come back to faith in general, they need the church community to engulf them and support them and nurture them. And so we have an opportunity as church to really make an impact in people's lives. I love the fact that you kind of reminded us to not lead them out to the wolves because, as the Bible says, Satan's a roaring lion looking for those he can devour. And who's going to go after? He's going to go after the weak. And the person who just came to faith is really that fledgling, that little lamb that doesn't have a flock around him to support him or her as she comes back to the fold.
Right. And, one of the things that I remember, I was talking to this one gal and she was asking questions. She was a former drug addict and she was really seeking God. And I told her, we were going back and forth, but I told her, you're going to be attacked very hard, harder than probably anyone here who believes. Because if you can fully convert and if you can fully have your faith in God to where you let all that negativity go and you let God's Holy Spirit fill your heart completely, you will be a strong weapon against evil because you will be a shining example of the power of God. And the devil doesn't want that to happen because your story can impact all the thousands of people that walk just like you right now. And
Right.
Satan can't afford to have that. So
Exactly.
that's why we need to, like you said, go out as a community and continue to nurture and help these people as best we can.
Excuse me. So I'm always curious. What are you excited about in this season of your life?
You know, I've always wanted to be a writer since I was little, but I never really pushed it. And I wrote my autobiography in two parts, A Walk in Shadows and Learning to Fly. And now after that, it's like God's just opened doors and blessed me, and I've just been writing like crazy now. And I write fiction. And one of my first books that I wrote, my little niece, she saw me writing one day, and she's real cute. She's real little, and she was like, "Kio," that's uncle in Spanish, and she's like, "Kio, can you just maybe write me a book?" And I was like, "Okay." So I wrote her a nursery rhyme book with pictures. So it's published now and it's out, and she hasn't seen it yet because I got my author copies coming. But as soon I just can't wait to give it to her. So she's gonna be excited. So
Oh,
that's what
that's
I'm
neat.
really excited about. And just being a positive influence and you know, all the money I make, I'm gonna take some of it and I wanna start really giving back to my local community the way that my grandparents used to. I kind of want to carry that legacy for a new generation.
That's amazing. I love to ask my guests this question. What do you want your legacy to be?
I want to be known as someone who went through a lot and never gave up. And the reason why they never gave up was because they put all their faith in God.
That's great. As we wrap this up, this conversation, it was a great conversation. What are the key takeaways you want our listeners to remember from our discussion today?
Evil definitely exists. Don't go looking for it, because if you go looking for it, you will find it and you will not like what you find. No matter how hard it gets, never give up. I was told that I would never walk again, that I would need kidney dialysis for the rest of my life, that I would need oxygen tanks for the rest of my life, and that I would be wheelchair bound, like I said, or at best have a walker to assist. And because of my faith, I denied all that and said, no, God's going to heal me. And He did. So have faith in God no matter how bad it gets, because through Him, anything is possible.
That's great, Michael. So, where can people find your two books, Learning to Fly, Surviving COVID-19, and A Walk Among Shadows? And where can I learn more about you?
My books are all on Amazon. Um, but I also have my own ISBN number. So if you go to Amazon and you look, if you don't want to get them through Amazon, you can just copy the ISBN number and go to your local bookstore and order it there, depending on which way you want to go. I have my own personal website, themichaelandrews.com. If you go there, you can see all the projects I'm working on, all the stories I'm writing, and things that I'm getting into every day, and also a little blog on my personal journey if you want to hear about that.
Well, Michael, thanks for taking the time to be on the podcast and giving us some great content and some hope as we know that and remind ourselves that no matter what happens in life, God still sits on the throne and God's still in charge. So thank you for sharing your story and your amazing journey from the shadows back to the light. So thank you for being a wonderful guest on the show.
Thank you so much.